One more? Yes. We practice.
There's a lot of chocolate up there.
All right. I imagine there's so many conversations that just went on that probably amongst one of them there's something very profound that could be continued. If that's so, please feel free to continue it. I'll just ask the question if anybody wishes to continue in the vein of cynicism versus the sacred. Just a reminder, that's one of the conversations that started earlier, even though I was just having it by myself. So in any case, what's ever on your mind. Oh. Yeah.
So I had several conversations with people about how my sister's passing away Thursday just made me so vulnerable, and beautifully so. So I can see a huge benefit from other people dying. But that seems horrible, doesn't it? And now, I don't really mean to focus on that part. It's the vulnerability, how to continue to be vulnerable when you start to drop back into kind of, let's go shopping. But I loved it, that vulnerability. I loved the connection with everybody, here and there.
Yeah. Well, in a certain way, that is the same conversation. I wouldn't put the word cynicism in there, but the sacred aspect of it certainly is there, and the aspect of that the ordinary way that we're carried on. You say, well, yeah, okay, that was kind of nice and fresh and open. Now, what do I usually do? How do I usually relate to life? And so that's actually one of the big challenges. Big challenge. You could say that's kind of all of practice is embodied in that. And you had, right, it was a very precious opportunity to have something just put its finger on the record and it stopped. The recording stopped. The PSA that usually plays in your mind stopped. And then you had to look and see what was there, and then be with that, and be open with others. Because if I'm just telling myself my usual story, I just turn to Dora and I just tell her the usual story. But then if I stop that, it's kind of awkward. But then you do say what's actually on your mind. If you have the space and you have the connections, and you can open, then you can meet in a way that you can't meet otherwise. And this is one of the things that, even the little piece that you said is like, you can see that being close to the death of another person can be profoundly beneficial. This is like, ooh, we see, oh, that's not something I would just want to go down the street and say, just met you on the bus, but parting words, the death of another person can be really beneficial. Bye. You don't go there except when you have basically colleagues on the path, when you have friends in the Dharma, when you have people with that kind of resonance. And so that provides an opportunity to sustain that. And that's something that we can do if we kind of keep it in the back of our minds, that there's always some aspect of a sacred opportunity. We can be open in a different way. We can be ready to hear, to listen in a more open way, and to speak in a way that's not just the public service announcement that continually runs. So there we are.
just note that in our society, I think there's so much pressure to get back to normal, kind of, oh, too bad, but, the next time I see you, I'm sure you're past that by now. We can do what we always did. And so I think it's really helpful that you noticed, you're noticing the positive aspects of the experience. And, I guess we can just encourage ourselves to be confident that, to trust that and not to be pressured by outside forces to get back to normal and give that up. And I think at the same time, those experiences will fade. I know when I had a couple years of kind of disability and chronic pain at kind of a higher level, it really increased my sense of connection and openness to what other people experience who have maybe, like at the time I was bedridden most of the time and so just thinking about, wow, people who don't have mobility, like having a real connection with that, it was so valuable, and it was very, not just intellectual, it was visceral, and it was very connecting. And as I've gotten less of that, it's fading. I thought, oh, I'll always have that now. I'll always have that deep kind of feeling and connection, but now I have to kind of look for it again. So I think it's hard to, we don't necessarily keep that, but as Bill's saying, there is always opportunity. There's always opportunity. It may not be as kind of large in the sense of as it is when someone dies, and it's quite a big event for us. But nonetheless, I think there's little things all the time where we can kind of foster that sense of connection and vulnerability.
As far as vulnerability goes, at least for me, in my experience, what happens is that the feeling of vulnerability tapers off, but it leaves you with a new kind of openness that you never forget. My father died 50 years ago almost, and I'm still vulnerable when I think about that, but it makes me also more open to people who lose their loved ones. I mean, I'm quicker to drop the veil of everyday stories and, give somebody a hug or be close to them or whatever. So if that shift goes from vulnerability to a different kind of openness, I think that's a huge benefit.
There's a way in which the drama of these situations, the way they stand out, is what gives us the opportunity. It is disruptive, and so there's a great benefit in that. And one of the deeper challenges in finding the sacred in our life is not requiring the drama in order to find the opportunity. Not to have, it has to get up to this level and then I'll pay attention. But the rest of the time I'll just kind of leave it on autopilot. Because that's where, particularly in our situation, it's actually very easy. We don't have disruptive calamities in our own personal lives. We don't have to generally worry about, I'm now just flipping back to the Tibetan stories because that was in my head from yesterday. We don't have to worry about whether all the yaks die or whether the hailstorm wipes out all the food, where we don't have, there isn't actually really a plan B. So we live in kind of this band of relative stability and comfort most of the time, and within that, then it's much easier to just go, and finding the opportunities within that, being actually be able to be sort of authentically present with all the full dynamic range of what plays out in the mind, and be actually able to tune into the subtle disquiet that's always running in the background, and be able to work with the full range. Then we can begin to be sort of authentic. I won't necessarily use the word vulnerable because that feels a little bit kind of, the stakes are too high with that word, but be really authentic about being with our experience as it unfolds day to day, moment to moment, and really start to take seriously what you could say, to borrow from the Zen tradition, the koan of how does this moment present the opportunity for bodhisattva activity? How does this moment present the opportunity for deep inquiry into experience? And it's a different range, but you can get it.
So I've been thinking a lot about patterns of suffering, particularly how our attempts to alleviate suffering create their own patterns of suffering, and the fear of moving past that, jumping the wagon out of that rut into deeper experience, being more awake, the fear of what comes next. If we're not suffering, what are we doing? What do we do with our minds? And so I've been understanding that presents greater opportunities for caring for others, helping others reach that same, jumping out of the rut, right? So that's part of what comes next. But the fear of leaving behind those patterns, those coping skills that are ineffective, the fear of leaving behind a known suffering for an unknown experience is still very present. And so it would be helpful to know how you answer those questions when they arise, or
There are quite a few pieces in there. And so I'll try, and I'm going to have to try to hold them in my mind, and I may have to come back for clarification. The first one was, I think, the first piece of it is actually a very profound principle. You could say it's almost the definition of samsara, or the definition of the cycle of suffering, which is all the attempts, all the problem solutions create seeds for other problems. And that's actually, that's a difficult one to really wrestle with. That's a very, very deep contemplation. But it's possible to look even, I've looked, actually I've sort of ran the mental experiment to see in all the things, all the circumstances, the life where people had come up with like the best new thing, the thing that was going to fix something else, did it actually create conditions for something else that was also problematic? And I've yet to find anything that violated that. Not that there was not benefit, but there also, There was always this seed of something. So then deep refuge is actually this process of stepping out of that pattern of hoping for a fix or trying to plug the leak. That's where it goes. And I think you didn't explain very much about, there was kind of a leap from kind of letting go of these patterns and winding up in a place where there wasn't suffering, which to me is a pretty dramatic, there's a long novel that goes between that first chapter and then I turned into a Buddha. Tell me more. So there's a big piece in there. So that, I think, merits some conversation, but perhaps separately. But just that notion that, oh, yeah, I am involved in all these patterns, and they're, with this, with the asterisk, it's working okay. Sort of okay. I recognize the limits, but if I put it aside, what happens after that? So I think it's important to relate to the incremental aspect of the path and be kind of very just kind of simple about it. And in that, working incrementally with our changing habit patterns and our openness and our deeper kind of gradually deepening insight, then we start, I think, get some confidence that there is actually something in this way of being that is, you could see, is actually meaningful. Meaningful not in the sense that there's a good story that's satisfying to tell about it, but it's meaningful in terms of this is something, this is a worthwhile way to live. My own benefit unfolds naturally, and the ability to benefit others also unfolds. And when we say benefit, it's going beyond suffering, going beyond those limitations. So I think relating to the incremental piece of it, which I think is probably the case for virtually everybody, I will say, well, there could be somebody here who just gets they're karmically ripe to the point all they need is a little, and they flop off the cliff and land in Buddhahood. But that's probably not how it unfolds for most of us. And even if we have some kind of dramatic experience or experiences, the difference between experience and realization, the stability of realization, is a very big difference. And being able to cultivate a relationship with our own experience and sort of deepen that relationship, that's an incremental thing. And so even if we've had a very dramatic insight of some kind, an openness, whether it's in terms of a sense of connection, the way Carolyn was talking about, or a meditative experience, whatever it is, these openings, as you were also mentioning, these openings, they fade. They're maybe inspiring memories, but how we actually take advantage of those and then do the long-term boring work of abandoning our loyalty to the patterns that cause suffering and cultivating more loyalty and karmic imprints for the things that actually undermine that. That's lifetime work, or lifetimes of work. So I think just taking the gradual, sticking with a sense that it gradually unfolds. But there may be more conversation to have, but that we could do that some other time.
I think this might be along those lines. I have been reading Daring Steps, Ringeltoku, and I was delighted at his explanation of the first turning of the wheel, effectively. Very simple. Yeah, I can do this, right? Kind of. Well, then I got to the Mahamudra section, and I started slowing down quite a bit. It's like, this is a little harder. And then he described the different types of bodhisattvas. There's the king bodhisattva, who will get enlightenment and then bring everybody else with him eventually. The captain bodhisattva, who will get enlightenment along with everybody else at the same time. And the shepherd bodhisattva, of which Chenrezig, of course, is the kind of premier example, who waits until everybody else gets enlightened before he completely allows himself to get enlightened. At best, I might be a captain bodhisattva, maybe. Of course, then I get into that cynical American self-judgment, and, oh, I'm not a shepherd bodhisattva. I'm not good enough. I'm not the best, blah, blah, blah. And the reality is, I'm not, if I were truthful, I'm not even sure I'm really a captain bodhisattva. In fact, I'm not so sure I'm a very good bodhisattva at all. But I keep saying those prayers and hoping for the best, but just wanted you to comment a little bit on, on that kind of thing, if you don't mind.
Well, yeah. In our current culture of kind of extreme sports, and I'll digress by saying that we went out to dinner last night. In the corner of the restaurant, there was this TV screen playing, and I was kind of magnetized to look at it every once in a while because there were these very, very dramatic things happening. There was these pictures of people going over waterfalls and kayaks and smashing into rocks and barely surviving, and there was one where these ski tips pointing over this chasm with this 3 foot wide strip of snow going like this down between rocks at about almost perpendicular. I don't think they actually went down that. That was just imagine. So in this context, then I think it's actually worth backing off, dialing it down a little bit, and going back to the incremental piece of it, and understanding these things as really amazing potential that we have, as opposed to an indication of current moral failure that we have not accomplished them. So that's let go of the extreme skiing version of this. You'll be happier, everybody else will probably be happier too. There is the Midwestern habit. I've noticed this going, you go to somebody's house and they've made something for dinner and it's really quite good, but the cook goes on at some length about, this is just really no good. This is terrible. It's terrible. So has anybody done that? Has you witnessed that? Okay, yeah. Don't you know? Yeah. Oh, it's terrible. It's the tuna noodle hot dish. It's just nothing. It's no good. Yeah. But that I'm bringing up that piece of it because when we get into the self-denigration piece, it can have that we're not doing anything for anybody else either in that. It doesn't really help. So sort of kind of being our honest, good-hearted, bumbling self, and bumble away with whatever the appropriate degree of transparency is at the moment, I think it's a nice infection for the culture to do that. That's a virus that we could put out and hope spreads.
I think I can do this without the mic.
No, but the streamers.
There's a beautiful passage in Shantidevas, The Way of the Bodhisattva, where he talks about how all the bodhisattvas of the past have trained. And then the verse that follows that, he says, just so, and for the benefit of beings, will I embrace these attitudes of mine. And in the Dharma, I think, step by step, will I abide and train myself. When I got to that step by step, and I will train myself, I was so relieved. It's like, okay, I don't have to do the whole thing right now.
Yeah.
But step by step, and if that's the way the ones in the past trained, then I can do step by step.
Yeah. We actually don't have an alternative when it gets down to it. That's probably the howlingly humorous piece of it, is that we actually entertain this idea that it could be done some other way, and that's the path of of perpetual disappointment, because we're always looking for something that actually cannot be done. It just can't be done any other way. And so this part of our habit to abstract things to a big level can be helpful in certain contexts, but it actually gets in the way when we really need to act in a way that's authentic and effective. We're lost in this abstraction of conditions. We're lost in an abstraction of the path, an abstraction of goals. It's very big. Holding those in a way where we can actually, in the moment, take a step and then another step. That's the only part that we can actually really do. The other can be inspiring and guiding. Kind of that large picture can be that. But to actually do it, it turns into step by step. And that includes falling down. Dora, you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, you can be like me, and it's a big experiment just to let everybody else go first at the potluck. So, step by step.
Nobody's come to take the mic away. And I'm sorry, but I'm feeling full of ideas this morning. You began, Bill, by talking about cynicism.
Mm-hmm.
If ever there was a time of year for a certain kind of cynicism, this is it. The sort of materialistic marketing of a sacred holiday. And it's not, okay, so we're not Christians, and we're not Jewish, and we're Buddhists. But even for us, this is a special time of year because it's the winter solstice.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a time when I've always been glad it was in December. This is a time when the light slowly begins to return. And for me, it's a special time because I think of the light of the Buddha returning to us. And even though the worst of the winter is ahead of us, still, every day, step by step, the light comes back to us. And in the face of the sort of cynical marketing of this time of year, maybe we could hold that thought as a way of not being cynical.
That's all the experiments that we do where we can say it's the cynical marketing, but actually if we look, the cynicism that we can address in any step is our own cynicism. And our capacity for delivering a critique of circumstances and people should, I think, always be exceeded by our capacity to have something profoundly positive in our minds and be able to articulate that better than our cynicism. So there's that I think that's a very important piece. That's a very important piece, because that's the piece that is profoundly positive. What you said is very nice, and if that's offered to others, then those who understand it in the terms that you presented it could have, be uplifted by it. And I think we all have some kind of obligation to find our own voice in our own way in this regard, to find the ways that we see a way towards taking advantage of the opportunities that always exist, even in the midst of things that we can profoundly and accurately criticize and critique. Showing in refuge, there is the quality of abandoning that which is no longer useful. There's also the quality of going deeply into the positive potential. And that a lot of times that's the part that we actually lack, is the appreciation for that side of it and the ability to articulate that in a way that's actually helpful to ourselves, but also can be helpful to others. Oh, right. Possession is 9/10 of the law, somebody said.
I'm sorry, it just, Linda saw me raise my hand lowly. Sorry, excuse me. Regarding the daily, ordinary, and the step-by-step in that, I've noticed that I know that it's really helpful if I break out of my usual pattern and speak or act authentic to the moment. And then I realize, and I want others to realize that, yeah, I'm not my usual wise-mouthing self, but this came from my heart. And then I realize I need to hear and allow that same opportunity to others to change their pattern and speak authentically or act authentically. But it's hard to go slow enough to allow that, and it's hard to recognize that somebody else is speaking differently from their usual. I can't bring my assumptions of, he's saying that again. But it's difficult to recognize. Can you add anything about encouraging tips for recognizing the chance in myself and opening that for others?
I think the first thing is something you already mentioned, which is the slowing down. Just the speed of the mind is in and of itself convincing in a way that it really should not be convincing. It's kind of like we saw a movie called Liar's Dice, and in it this guy did this very quick patter of moving stuff around like that. It's like, wow, totally entrancing. And we entrance our own mind with that patter. So slowing down enough so that there's some space in both our speaking and in our listening, that's helpful. I think it's also very helpful to engage in ongoing continuous contemplation. So we put in our minds some kind of aspiration to engage in this way, and also to engage in it in a way that is more humble, so that we don't have grand expectations for ourselves or our impact on others or on what they might do to confirm for us that we gave them this great opportunity to be authentic as opposed to what they usually do. All right. Marcy?
Okay, so I was thinking about this topic and putting some things together with my own experience and how it relates to my practice. I feel like I do have a lot of cynicism, like about if I've had a past experience that told me, oh, this is what this is like. For instance, marriage. Like, I'm very cynical. I'd probably never get married again. But that's based on a past experience, right? So then I bring that forward into my present assumptions. And I think that with practice, I tend to do that too, where I'm bringing this past experience, whether it's positive or negative, oh, this is how this is. And I think that's where there's a risk for like cynicism coming into my practice. So I've tried to do things like for me, so this is my question, I guess, is that I feel like just as a human being and my natural need for like constant novelty and entertainment or newness, yeah, like everybody, I have to be constantly sort of doing that to experience something as sacred again. Like I have a picture of the Karmapa as my screen, like when my phone comes on. And when I first put that on my phone, it was so inspiring. And now it's just like, you know, this is like another guy. And so there, I don't know, I guess my question is like, how do we, I don't know, I just feel like it's a constant almost battle with my mind to not fall into this, oh, yeah, like my shrine, oh my God, like, I'm so inconsistent with my shrine, like I don't know how to relate to it. It's really difficult for me to relate to it as sacred, you know, like, it's all dirty right now, like terrible. Anyway, I don't know if you can get a question out of that, but it's part reflection, part question.
Yeah, well, you might not have offered a question, but you offered a fairly good description of myself. So, now that piece of novelty, there is the side of in our practice where we actually have to get over the grasping for entertainment. There is a piece of that, but the ability of our mind and our ability to create habit patterns, it's, you remember Jabba the Hutt? It's like, you can always eat one more experience and turn it into so what? It doesn't matter how good it is or how profound it is. And on one-year retreat, it took a while to kind of figure this out. After like, oh, something would happen, I went, wow. And then after about 2 weeks, it's kind of like, And then after a while, something else would happen. And it took a long time for me to actually notice that in my own patterning, the half-life of any profound inspiration was about 2 weeks. I could wrap my head around whatever it was and kind of turn it back into something kind of just wallpaper, just a screensaver in memory, and it didn't have that same kind of impact. So this is a challenge. This is a deep challenge. Part of what I've learned is that I actually have to keep maintaining my shrine every day and watch these cycles and watch it. Because if I give up when I say, oh, I've just turned it into another screensaver, I'm not even paying attention. If I give up then, I've just eaten something else, and Jabba the Hutt is just a little bit bigger and a little bit heftier, and that habit is a little bit stronger. So it does take a lot of, I think, personally, it takes a lot of courage and focus, and that comes from a lot of different directions. Some of it actually comes from the slap in the face of meditating on death, the certainty of it and the uncertainty of the time. How am I actually going to take advantage of this boring life that I have? The non-entertaining space in between the momentary excitement that happens, whether it be ordinary entertainment or spiritually engaging experiences. in the midst of this, going back to the question of how we actually find our way to relating to experience moment to moment as sacred, this, I think, is key to it. And this is where we actually have to lean more and more as time goes on into exploring the boringness of experience. Not necessarily, or just experience as ordinarily boring experience. We just have to go more and more into exploring the nature of that. And from the point of view of developing insight, the boringness of experience actually becomes our friend. The drama is actually very hard to settle in the middle of. It's such a great story. And since we're at that point, we're like scribbling away in our autobiography at a mad pace and just filling up pages with this incredible stuff that's going on. So good, bad, terrible, wonderful. We go like that. Like not much space for actually developing insight into kind of the nut of what's actually unfolding in the moment. So boringness then becomes our friend. Just the ordinariness of experience. And if you read Trungpa Rinpoche at all, he's really, the whole book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, an excellent read on this topic, because this sets aside completely the notion that going deeply is going to be something wonderful and entertaining. That actually, it could be, sometimes it is, but the wonderfulness of it actually comes through going straight into the ordinariness of experience, going straight into ordinary experience, and being with it in a way that's deeper and deeper and fresher and fresher. So over time, as we've developed some capacity for stability in the mind, it's actually necessary, I think it's essential, to go deeper into the practices that allow us to examine that experience, to meet our experience. And when that actually kicks in a bit, even boringness, even self-judgment, it doesn't matter what the experience is, but boringness can no longer be actually boring, because it's like, what on earth is that? I'm so bored. Cool. It's going on forever. Oh, I have stable boringness to settle my attention into. Oh, I'm so grateful for absolute boredom, sheer boredom. This is my friend. I've never had such a good friend. So that's kind of where I go. But I think, yeah, finding ways to engage in insight practice so that it does provide us kind of little incremental openings to look more and more at whatever experience arises, to take advantage of that opportunity, I think is really important. And then actually there is a different kind of novelty that arises, because that experience will look like you've never seen it before. It'll be the most novel thing in the world, which is true. Michael harps on this all the time. You've never had an experience twice. It's never the same experience. Get over it. Come on. That was with emphasis added. He doesn't talk the way I talk. But that's part of it. Just the freshness, being with the freshness, and using that moment as an opportunity to look into what's going on. So as always, if we want to have deep benefit from anything that we do, it's good to wake up a little bit and create an intention that whatever it is that we've done, that we take advantage of the energy invested and direct that energy towards more profound insight into our experience and deeper capacity for active compassion and the benefit of others.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
And thank you again. Thank you so much.